Welcome to the Chasing Thoughts podcast. Listen in as Mindy, Keith, and their guests take a deep dive into their own minds and souls to investigate the beauty of imperfection, challenge their beliefs, and embrace the richness of living a truly authentic life. Welcome to Chasing Thoughts.
Hello, everybody. It is Friday, April 5th. Can you believe that already? April. This is season 2, episode 15 of the Chasing Thoughts podcast with Keith and Mindy. And today we have Terry Tucker with us. Welcome, Terry.
Keith, Mindy, thank you very much for having me on.
Terry, I'm so excited to hear from you today because some elements of your profile, when I read it, really hit on some things that are currently coming up in my life. So I can't wait for this conversation. But first, why don't you just sort of tell the audience and tell us, what's your story? Like, how did you get to be the human that you are right now?
So I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I'm the oldest of 3 boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall and actually went to college at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina on a basketball scholarship. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, but this was long before the internet was available to help people find employment. Fortunately, I found that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. That was the good news. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. Professional, as I said, started out at Wendy's, and then I went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. Then I made the major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. After that, I started a school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball when we lived in Texas. But for the last 12 years now, have been battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma. And then just finally, my wife and I have been married for 31 years. We have 1 child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
That's
Really?
cool.
Yes, that's the first time I've ever heard anybody being a part of the Space Force. That is so cool.
It is. We're very proud of her.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Mainly, I'm just familiar with that from the Netflix show with Steve Carell.
Yeah, I'm thinking
Yeah,
it's
they're trying to play that down a little bit. Yes.
So, if you don't mind, I currently have several people in my life who have cancer. And so I'm walking that path as an observer and a supporter. And I'd just like to dive into that a little bit. I think that a lot of people experience illness, and that is a very challenging journey. And it sounds like you were a supporter to it as a young man and then experienced that journey firsthand yourself. So can you just talk a little bit more about your relationship with cancer?
Yeah, the big C, as our family calls it, has been part of our lives. 3 of my 4 grandparents died of cancer. I think from their perspective, it was lifestyle. I mean, they smoked and they didn't exercise and all the things that we know now that potentially could cause cancer. They didn't really understand back when they were in the 20s and 30s and things like that. But my dad was 51 years old when he developed end-stage breast cancer back in the 1980s. And back then, they really didn't know how to treat a man with breast cancer. So they told him to go home and die. And he lived another 3.5 years. And I believe he did because he had a purpose. He had something to do in his life. He was in real estate. He loved real estate. He actually worked up till 2 weeks before he died. And I sort of took that lesson and tucked it in the back of my mind and said, well, when it's my turn in the barrel, I need to have that purpose. I need to have something to do. So it was an incredibly difficult time. I mean, literally, my grandmother was in one bedroom, and then right next door to her, my father in the other bedroom, both dying over a 3.5-year process. Really nothing you could do other than offer comfort, care, be there for them. And I had some great talks with my dad as he was laying in bed dying, and I'm very grateful for that, but it's not something I would choose for anybody. So 2012, fast forward, I get this rare form of melanoma. And most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun. It affects the melon, the pigment in our skin. Mine has nothing to do with that. It's a rare form that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. Mine appeared on my foot. And in 2012, when I was diagnosed, they said, well, more than likely you'll be dead in 2 years because we have absolutely nothing to offer you. And I thought, well, you just gave me a death sentence. Maybe I can take that death sentence and try to turn it into a life sentence. And 12 years later, that's what I've been able to do.
Wow, that's incredible. Did it take a little while? Was there a period of grief or denial before you were able to do that? Or was it pretty easy to transform into that?
No, it was not. I mean, you're looking at me now. There's no S on my chest. I do not have a cape and fly around with magical powers. I mean, I think I went through all the stages that we would associate, with grief. I mean, when my dad died, I was already athletic. I already ate right, but it was like, I'm going to do everything I possibly can to improve my health, see my doctor every year and those kind of things. So when I got cancer, it was like total denial. I can't possibly have cancer. And then you move into that anger stage. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. And our daughter was in high school when I was diagnosed. Like my dad, I was diagnosed when I was 51 years old. And there was sort of a bargaining with God. It was like, look, just let me live long enough to see her graduate from high school. And then I absolutely got down. I got depressed, felt sorry for myself. But then I just got to a point where it was like, this sucks, but I'm going to have to embrace the suck, for lack of a better term. I did not like the cards that I'd been dealt, but I knew I was going to have to play those cards to the best of my ability. And, there are a lot of ups and downs, peaks and valleys through it all, but it's been absolutely a challenge, but almost a challenge like, you are not going to beat me. You may kill me, but you are not going to beat me. And that's kind of the way I've been looking at it for the last 12 years now.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Really
Yeah.
beautifully said. Yeah, you were talking about purpose, both with your dad and with you. And I think this is a fascinating subject because I agree with you that purpose is necessary for a fulfilling life. But for a lot of folks, especially folks who might be down and out or sick, it feels like just another thing to do. Like, oh, now I got to find my purpose. Great, thanks. Right. And oh, if I don't have it, that means I'm a loser. Right. And then people associate purpose with job, which is another confusion. Right. And so I think it'd be interesting to dive into like purpose a little bit. When you use that word, what does that mean?
Yeah, I use that word, and I think incorrectly, in the singular. Like there is one thing in our lives that we are supposed to do. And I can't speak for everybody else, but at least for me, I think that word is plural. Purpose is. I've had purposes in my life. When I was young, I was an athlete. I ate, drank, and slept basketball. It was all I wanted to do. It was what I really felt my purpose was. And then as I got into adulthood, I wanted to follow in my grandfather's footsteps. My grandfather was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. And he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But when I expressed an interest in following in his footsteps, my dad, who was an infant at the time when my grandfather was shot, was like, absolutely not. You're going to college. You're going to major in business. You're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. But that's the life my father wanted me to live. That wasn't the life I felt I was supposed to live. So I had a choice when I graduated. I could have said, hey, Dad, I know you're dying, but I'm going to go blaze my own trail and do my own thing. Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So my first two jobs were in business because that's what my dad wanted me to do. And then I sort of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited till my father passed away, and then I followed my own dreams. And that's one of the things that I am most proud of in my life, is that I never let my dream die. I never let what I felt as an adult was my purpose to do. And now, in all honesty, as I'm probably coming to the end of my life, I think my purpose has switched again to put as much goodness, positivity, motivation, love back into the world with whatever time I have left. So I guess that's a long-winded answer. I think we have purposes in life, and I wouldn't get real excited if you haven't found yours yet. I always think back, having worked at Wendy's, I always think of the Colonel Sanders story, who started Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I don't know if that was his purpose in life, but he didn't start Kentucky Fried Chicken until after he retired and was in his 60s. So it's never too late.
I love that. So true. It isn't too late. And sometimes purpose, like you said, my purpose, I feel, is very similar to yours. Like, I just feel a calling to love. And that means my husband, my kid, it means my grocery store clerk, it means my clients, right? And so, as far as I can tell so far, that's my purpose. And it's that simple and that robust at the same time.
It really is. And so I still have tumors in my lungs, and I'm still being treated for those tumors. And one of the nurses who takes care of me at the infusion center gave me a book. She's a former hospice nurse before she went into infusion therapy. And the book is called Imagine Heaven. And it's about people who have near-death experiences. And one of the interesting things I took out of that book was that no matter who the person saw when they had their near-death experience, whether it was, Jesus or a saint or an angel or a friend or a relative, the one question that everybody seemed to get asked was, how do you treat my people? In other words, just like you said, Mindy, how do we treat each other? And it's that relationship that we have. I've been asked on podcasts, how do you want to be remembered? It's like, well, one, I really don't. I mean, nobody's going to remember that I was even here 100 years from now. But what I want to do is connect, is to have that connection with people. And when I get that, it energizes me. It gives me, when I'm feeling down, when I'm not feeling good because of my treatments, it gives me that purpose, and that purpose gives me that energy.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this beautiful story I love about how if you plant white roses next to red roses, over years, the white roses will start to take on a pink hue. Like, there's a merging of essence, right? And I think that's what I hear you saying, is that it's not really about being remembered as you in your form or things that you did. It's about merging and connecting with other people so that your essence continues in your daughter and your grandkids and the people you love and know. And I just think that's such a beautiful vision.
It is. And again, that's looking at life through, it's not all about us, and I've seen so many people that think they're born empty, and that when they get out of school and they get into life, whatever that looks like for them, that then their job is to fill up their empty self. They've got to get that great job and make a lot of money, drive the nicest car and live in the nicest house and have the greatest kids and all that stuff. And what I found is it's just the opposite. We're not born empty. We're born full. We're born with everything we need to be successful in life. However you define that for yourself, we just need to find what's in there, pull it out, and use it for our benefit. So our job should not really be to fill ourselves up. Our job should be to empty ourselves out with our unique gifts and talents, certainly for the betterment of ourselves and our family, but also for the betterment of our friends, our community, our country, etc.
I could not agree more. I always think about Michelangelo and that quote about when he carved David out of marble, and somebody said, "How did you do it?" And he said, "I just removed everything that wasn't David." Right? It's like, we're doing the work to remove everything that isn't pure Mindy here, right? And that's my job. And it's such a beautiful way to think about life, right? That it's already all there.
Exactly.
So share with us a little bit about how you are currently like embodying your purpose. I know you're a coach, you're a speaker. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing in the world.
Yeah. So, like so many other people and companies, I started a speaking business just as COVID hit. And so I had to figure out a different way to deliver my message because nobody was doing anything either virtually or in person. And somebody reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you like to be a guest on my podcast?" And I said, "Sure. What's a podcast?" I had absolutely no idea what a podcast was. And he explained it to me. And I said, "Okay, sounds intriguing. I think I'll give it a try." And I remember I had post-it notes all around the camera with things that I wanted to say. And he would ask me a question and I would lean in and I would read the post-it note. I was terrible. I was horrible. I provided no value at all to the audience of that individual, but I kind of enjoyed it. And I thought back in my life, the first time I drove a car, was I any good at it? No. First time, I cooked a meal, I think I burned the water when I was boiling it. The first time I studied algebra, I was not good at it. And so it was, how do I get better at it? And I remember I was talking to my publisher and I said, Scott, I listen to every podcast I've ever been on because I want to be better. I want to be a better guest. I want to have better stories. How many times do I say or huh or do those filler words? And he said, no, Terry. He said, it's not about being good. It's just about not sucking. And I said, well, thanks for the title of my next book. Just don't suck. No, that's not true. It won't be that. But I mean, it was really, no, I want to be good at this. And this really does. I mentioned I'm in cancer treatment still. I spend an entire week at the hospital and then I get 2 weeks off. And then I do another week at the hospital. So during those 2 weeks now, I find my purpose is to be a guest on podcasts, to write my blog, to write another book that I'm working on and things like that. And those things give me energy. They give me purpose in life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful.
I was just thinking, I've been in and out of therapy, learning things for, I don't know, 20 something years now. And the things that you are saying, I have never heard before. And even after becoming a coach and sitting down with a therapist, I remember a time where she was reading from a workbook that she had. I'm like, I know exactly what you're going to say because I just read this book, and I am completely shocked and amazed that I have never heard anything of what you're saying before, that we're born full, and we're not, our job is not to fill ourselves up, but to empty ourselves. I think that it is so powerful. It is genius, especially coming from somebody in your position where if I have a cold, I'm in bed, like begging God, just end it, and you're in this position. You're just an amazing man. Like I am blown away. I'm even emotional. This is incredible.
Well, thank you for saying that. I don't feel, I feel like I'm just a man. I'm a flawed individual. I make mistakes. I don't want anybody to think that I don't have bad days because I absolutely do. Like I said, I go to these treatments. They just beat me up physically, mentally, emotionally. And, I cry, I get down, I feel sorry for myself. I just don't let myself stay there. And I think staying there or not staying there, and I'm not talking about people that are, they need medication to function and things like that. I'm not talking about those people, but it's a choice. It's a choice to say, yeah, I feel like crap today, and I'm going to take it out on that nurse who's caring for me or that therapist who's trying to help me. And I literally made a conscious decision when I was diagnosed that I would never take out my misfortune on somebody that was trying to help me, that somebody was trying. And I've seen that. I've seen it so many times where people, I actually had a conversation with the receptionist in the lab where I get my blood drawn. And every morning, every Monday morning when I go for treatment, I'm there at 6 o'clock in the morning. We do the blood work. And she made a comment to me. She said, you see me every morning and you ask me, how was your weekend? How's your family doing? How's your side business going and stuff like that? She's like, nobody ever talks to me like that. I said, well, why do you think they don't? She said, I don't know, but everybody who comes up to this desk is mad and pissed off and, takes it out on me. And I talked to her about the difference between perspective or I messed that up. Perception. Perception is how you see the world. And it's based on your background, your education, how you were brought up, your experiences, everything. But if you can turn life into perception, like how is that other person feeling right now? And that's what I tried to talk to her about. It's like, you have such a unique opportunity to be kind and positive and caring to these people that are scared and feel hopeless and maybe getting a blood test or a scan result that is going to be like, sorry, there's nothing more we can do for you. It's your time. Or, you know what, now you're going to have to start chemo that's going to make you lose your hair and have diarrhea and throw up and all that kind of stuff. These people are scared, and you have a unique opportunity to put some goodness into their life. And you could tell she'd never thought of it that way. It was always, these people are being mean to me. Well, turn that around. How can you be nice, kind, caring to them?
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think that's true even in day-to-day life.
Sure.
When I am able to take that mindset, all of a sudden the world seems like my playground, and I'm not worried about what people think of me, or right. Because I'm so filled up with what I want to give away, and I can't hold that space all the time, but I certainly am working on it more because it's such a better experience of life.
It is. And, I mean, I look back on my life. I was a college athlete. I was in law enforcement. I've done a lot of physical things in my life. And now I don't have a left leg and I'm in a wheelchair. So when you can't do what you were good at, you do what's important. And I think, Mindy, what you're talking about is that's what you're doing what's really important in life. All the rest of this stuff is superfluous and really, in the scheme of things, doesn't matter. But how you interact, how you have relationships, how you connect with other people, that's really what's important in life.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about the physical identity a little bit. I was a mountaineer for a long time, did a lot of outdoor stuff. Then I was in a car accident. It left me in the hospital bed for 3 months and changed my life forever, right? And nobody at the hospital warned me about the shift in my identity when I could no longer identify as a person who did XYZ with my physical body. And I remember coming out of that experience and thinking, like, I need to find a way to write a grant to have like coaches or therapists visit some patients in hospitals, because anytime you undergo a major surgery or a major like physical reconstruction of your body, there is a huge identity shift. Mm-hmm. And it's challenging. And what I found in myself is that there were years where my thought process was like, well, when I get back to being who I was, right, that's really who I was, and this damaged version of me wasn't the real me. And it took years of integration and work to realize, no, this is who I am. That other person doesn't exist anymore. And I guess that's part of the acceptance piece. But I mean, you've been through a journey that's even more that way. And did you struggle with the identity with your body, especially after being such a huge sports guy and a physical guy? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, my body is filled with scars. I mean, I have scars all over the place. I spent 5 years on a drug called interferon, where I took a weekly injection. So my abdomen and my kind of love handle area is nothing but scar tissue, because every week I was injecting for 5 years into that. But you get to a point, or at least I did, where it was like, yeah, and I don't mean, I'm trying to find a different way to say this, but I mean, if you saw me naked, you would be like, oh my God, that's ugly. But I've earned those scars. I've paid the price for those scars. So what you may say is ugly, I'm like, hey, I earned those. I'm pretty proud of them because I'm still here and I'm still moving forward. And I remember when I was a police officer, there were people that I worked with who'd been on the job for, 30, 35, 40 years and couldn't retire because their entire identity was tied up in that gun, that badge, and the authority that they had. And they felt that without that, that they were nobody. And, you're like, you gave your life to protecting and serving other people. How could you possibly not think that your life after that would have value? And so many of them didn't, and they couldn't retire, and they should have retired. They should have retired a long time ago, but their whole identity was tied up in what they do and what they did. And I've just never been that kind of person. I always felt that I had enough education, I had enough background, I had enough experience. I'll go try something else. I might not be any good at it. I mean, most of the time I wasn't, especially when I started. I had to learn new skills. I had to get more educated and things like that. But it really, I'm not saying I don't value myself. I certainly do. But at the same time, my identity isn't tied up in anything that's going on, at least in this physical space right now.
Yeah. Yeah, Keith,
That
I
is
was,
so
yeah, I'm sure that veterans struggle with a similar sort of thing. What's your experience with that, both with yourself and with other veterans you coach?
Yeah, they actually in a lot of the research that comes out with joining the military, they identify it as an identity shift. And I'll even go farther saying, it's a cultural shift, when you're joining the active duty. And I think it's the same thing being a police officer, any type of first responder. It's a different world. I remember being in school and messing around with another veteran, and his girlfriend got really mad at me because we were saying horrific stuff to each other. And she was like, "Why are you guys so mean?" And I'm like, "No, this is how we express respect for each other, and things like that." So when you leave the military, there is no training on shifting your identity again. So you hold on to that military identity in the civilian world, and you're stuck in this place where you're between cultures, you're between identities, and it's a very weird place to be in. So that is such a major thing. And I think the question I had was, I've gotten to a point where me and Mindy were just talking about this before you came on. I've gotten to a point where I have a lot of the new beliefs, the new identities that I've been able to create here, but I don't have it here yet. It hasn't been integrated into my being of who I am. Like one of the things you said when you said your identity is not a part, like it's not about what you do. It's not this physical plane. It is so much bigger than just that. How do you integrate that into your life? Because that was one, again, and I know I'm rambling, but one of the things, like all the therapy at the VA always said, talked about this stuff, but it's like, well, how do you do that? How do you make that a part of who you are?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Keith, and I don't know if I'm going to have a good answer for you, to be honest. I think back on, what were my values and where did I learn those values? I learned them from my parents. I mean, I mentioned I have two brothers, and we're all athletes. I have a brother who pitched for the University of Notre Dame. Another brother was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers, the National Basketball Association. And my dad was 6'5". So it's like 6'8", 6'7", 6'6", and 6'5". So we used to joke that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, not a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on, in front. But it was my parents that taught us the value of family, of loving each other, of caring for each other, of supporting each other. And I think you get that in the military. You get that as a first responder. I mean, you could have a knockdown, drag out, yell and scream and fight with somebody at roll call, and an hour later they're on the radio screaming they need help, you're going lights and sirens to make sure that person's okay. It's the culture, as I think you would probably agree in the military. There's a certain culture that maybe is not replicated in the civilian world. And so I guess you have to determine what your values are and what you're willing to, I guess, give up or not do anymore that you learned in the military. I mean, I am very, I have the short hair. If you're on time, you're late. I mean, all the things you learned in the military, I still do those things. And I find that, yeah, there's some people that are like, I'm chill, man. I don't care. I remember when we lived in California, we had my wife and I had somebody come out to the house to look at some landscaping, and he was supposed to be there on like Tuesday at 10 o'clock. And he showed up on Thursday at 3 o'clock. And I was like, you're 2 days late. He's like, no, man, the surfing was just too good. I had to, and I'm like, so, well, you go back and surf because you're not going to be part of this quote on this job. And I think that's just respect for yourself, respect for other people. And also not using for the sake of using, but using the resources that are available to you. Other people that will mentor you, people that'll be like, hey, Terry, you're on the wrong track here. You're being a knucklehead. Don't do that. Or you know what? Yeah, you're on the right track. It's kind of that old thing about, you end up being the product of the 5 people that you hang around with the most. And if those are good, caring, happy, dedicated people, you'll be that kind of person. Versus if you hang around people that are always negative and it's always drama and it's always about them, you'll probably turn into that kind of person as well. So I don't know if that's an answer for you, Keith. That's, kind of like, I'm just sort of spitballing here and seeing what we got. So
no, I actually love it because that's what I found in my own research and all this is, our beliefs are the way that we see the world is based off the values that we have. And like you had said, a lot of those are given to us as we're growing. And I think one of the things, even for like when you were talking about the officers that you knew that should have retired, but their identity was wrapped up in that. One of the things that we have to do is sort of investigate our values, see, was that given to me? If it was, does it align with me? And if it doesn't, what values do I want to have? And I've seen just in the short time that we've been talking, even when you were talking about becoming a police officer, you wanted to do that. Your father didn't want you to, and you said because of the love and respect you had for him, you started working in the business world. You got your business degree and all that, and that again just blows my mind. Because one of the things that I think is different in the civilian world from military, police, first responders is the individualism versus the community. Where in the civilian world it's more individualistic, and in those environments it's more community and stuff. So if you don't mind me asking, because this is, I think, is a very personal question, but what are your values? Because your values seem to push everything outwards instead of towards yourself.
Yeah, I mean, character, courage, and humility. You can go on my website and see them. Character, doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason, for the right reasons, in the right way. Courage, not having a lack of fear. I mean, this from being in the military. It's not being it's not being unafraid. It's saying I am afraid, but I'm still going to walk down that path. It's being a police officer where somebody probably with a gun is at the end of that alley. Well, you got to walk down that alley, and you've got to do it safely and smartly and things like that, but you still have to do it. You can't run away because you took an oath. And that, for me, that oath was internalized. It's like, I promise that I will do everything I can to protect the people that can't protect themselves from evil. And I've seen people that are pure evil, from predators, from bullies and things like that. So, and then humility, realizing that it's not about me. It's not about what I get. It's about what I give. And those really are my values. And I'll never forget this. I had a job interview after Wendy's, but before I went to work for the hospital, it was with a packaging company. And I was meeting with the senior vice president of marketing. And we spent 90 minutes, an hour and a half. And the entire time he talked to me about my life, basically from birth till I graduated from college. And at the end of the interview, I said, look, I got to ask you, this is the strangest interview I've ever been on. You never asked me one question about business, about marketing, about my philosophy. And he said, well, I've got plenty of people that'll tell me whether you're a good fit for the team or, you're good at marketing. By the way, I didn't get the job, so I probably wasn't a good fit. But he said, I want to hire people of good character. And he said, I believe character is taught or you develop it in the first 20 years of your life. And he said, character in my mind is caught. It's not taught. You're not going to read a book and say, okay, all of a sudden I'm a person of good character. You're going to look at situations and say, I really like the way she handled that. Or boy, I really didn't like the way that individual handled that situation. And that kind of develops your character based on the people that you're hanging around with. And I was lucky to have great parents who taught us great character.
I love that word character so much. It's not
Yes.
used very much. And I think that it was more of a value when we were kids, because we're all in our 40s and 50s. And I rarely see it talked about today. And, people are suffering. It's hard to live. Most parents are working, overworking, all those pieces that are happening. But I just think we should talk about that more. I just love that word so much because it really encompasses a steadfastness of self and a stewardship for everything around you. It's just such a beautiful concept, that word character.
Yeah, and you learn that in certain occupations. I'm sure Keith learned that in the military. You learned what good character looked like. You saw, leaders, in NCOs, officers, and things like that were like, boy, that I don't want, I don't want to go into combat with that individual. That person will probably get us killed. And where there were other people that, no, I want to be around that person. I want to learn. I thought it was interesting. I heard a statistic that said 163 of the Fortune 500 companies are run by people who were in the Marine Corps. And I thought they must be doing something right, in terms of how they lead and they grow their people. And then I read a great book called Trust-Based Leadership that was written by an individual in the Marine Corps. And they do. It's not like, it's like, all right, Mindy, here's the mission. Here's what needs to get done. I'm here to support you in any way you can, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it. You get with your team and you figure it out. And whatever you need from me, I'm here to help you. And that's an interesting way of leading that I don't necessarily think a lot of people do today. It's not like I'm here to support you. I'm here to tell you how to do it. Well, why would you do that? And I've been in meetings. We've probably all been in meetings with people where, you're all sitting around a conference table and the boss comes in and sits down and says, all right, here's the problem. And here's what I think should be done to fix the problem. All right, let's go around the room and talk about what everybody thinks. Now, what idiot is going to say something different than what the boss already said? But a better way to do that is for the boss to come in, sit down and say, all right, here's the problem. What are your thoughts on how we can fix this? Now people are empowered to say, hey, you know what, we're doing this wrong, or we should do a better job at this, or we should try this instead of that. Now you've got people willing to be engaged because they're not going against something that the boss may have already said.
Yeah.
I had a friend.
Go ahead, Keith.
Oh, sorry. I had a friend of mine that went through selection for special forces and he made it through and everything and then went so I don't even know where he is now, but he said that the biggest thing that was different was in all the training that we did, there were standards. So if we were going to do a 12-mile ruck march, we had 35-pound rucks, 4 hours to do it in, all of this standard. And if you don't make that, you fail. So exactly the parameters of what you have. But for when he went to the special forces training, up on the board would be 12-mile ruck march. It would have the stuff that they would need. And then it would say, do your best. That was it. So everybody knew that, coming up in that, there's that 4-hour standard, but they were looking for 2 hours. They were just looking for you to do your best. And people weren't picked necessarily on failing as long as they saw that they were pushing. So my buddy had crushed his hand towards the end, and if he went to the medics, he would be recycled. It would be like a whole another 6 months of his life. So he stayed through, and there's a lot of stuff that he did not get the time down that he wanted, but they saw how he did this with a crushed hand with multiple broken bones in his hands. And he was selected. So that character is so huge. And to me, the question that brings up is when your character is challenged, so like you said, basketball player, cop, SWAT, and all of this stuff. And then now you're in a wheelchair, you've lost your left leg, and so your character gets challenged. How do you strengthen that when you need to?
You do things that are challenged. You do things that are difficult. You do things that you don't want to do. And I'll be honest with you. I mean, it is literally, I think, that simple. How do you develop that? You do things you don't like to do that are uncomfortable. But our brains are hardwired to avoid pain and discomfort and to seek pleasure. So to the brain, the status quo, hey, it's comfortable, it's familiar, just leave it alone. Which means if you're sitting on the couch watching Netflix and you're like, yeah, I really should go to the gym. Yeah, you're good. Just sit here and watch Netflix. That's your brain saying, hey, it's comfortable and familiar, leave it alone. So it's doing those things. And I always tell people, first thing in the morning, get up, make your bed. Make your bed first thing in the morning. It gives you a win right out of the gate. And I remember reading a statistic that said a third of Americans, so 33% of Americans, hit the snooze button every morning at least 3 times. Now imagine how much time you're, there you go, Keith, all right, I'm hitting it. But imagine if you put the alarm clock in the bathroom where you had to get up out of bed to turn it off. Now all of a sudden you got found time. You got time you didn't think you were going to have. What can you do with that? Can I meditate? Can I pray? Can I just get ready and organize my day? All of a sudden you find these little things that you can do if you're willing to do things that are uncomfortable. And think about it. If you have just this much grit in your life, you're so much further ahead than all those people who never even start. I remember Jerry Rice, the San Francisco 49er wide receiver, used to have a quote that said, "Today I will do what others won't so that tomorrow I can do what others can't." I love that quote.
I love that. Yeah.
And throughout all of that, my head was like, I want an easier answer. I want an easier answer.
Exactly. We want an easier answer, but
Right.
do difficult things, and that strengthens your resolve. That's like, you know what? Yeah, I don't have a leg, but it's not gonna define me. I honestly believe I've probably done more living in the 12 years that I've been dying than I did my entire life before that.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting because this concept of grit, yes, right? That's that like self-challenge. That's doing the right thing, not the easy thing.
Right.
But then there's grind, which people get confused, which is pushing yourself really hard so that you self-abandon or wreck your nervous system or right. And I think that in today's world, people don't really understand the difference between those two. Like they're in the grind, they're in the hustle, they're self-abandoning. When grit is really the opposite of that. It's self-honoring. And I think there's some confusion out there in today's world about that.
I think there is, but I think, in order to be great at anything, you've got to love the grind, and it's, I mean, we're talking about the word grind in a negative way, but it's really, you got to love the work. Do you love doing this? And, I loved being a police officer. I hated standing on a traffic post in a full uniform for 12 hours in the hot sun. So, there's no perfect anything in the world. There's no perfect job. There's no perfect relationship. There's no perfect individual. Well, maybe there's one. but there's nothing perfect, and we like to get it where, well, I want it to be perfect or I'm not going to do it. No, I mean, I love the story. Jesse Itzler used to be part owner of the Atlanta Hawks, and he's married to Sarah Blakely, who's the founder of Spanx, which is a woman's undergarment company. And he tells the story. He said, when she first started, she started Spanx, which is now a multi-million-dollar company, with one prototype and $5,000. He said she had been a fax salesperson, going door to door, selling faxes, which we don't even do anymore. And he said if she would have waited until everything was perfect, until she had the financing, the marketing, the human resources, everything lined up, he said, I guarantee you somebody else would have taken that idea and run with it. Wherever you are in life, just start. Whatever you want to, just start. Start today. I mean, there's not going to be a perfect day, so why not start now? Start this afternoon when you finish listening to us. Doing whatever you want to do. Realize you're smart enough to figure it out as you go along.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I would add to it, start and then start again and start again and start again, because no one starts and then just continues. And there's this idea that, oh, well, I failed. That must not be for me. Or, oh, I didn't keep up my routine. So I'll wait till next month and start. I'll wait till Monday and start. But success comes in restarting every time you stop.
It is. And I developed or devoted a whole chapter in my book. The title of the chapter is Fail Often, Especially When You're Young. And I get criticized for that sometimes. It's like, you're encouraging failure. I said, I am encouraging failure, but not failure for the sake of failure, failure for the sake of learning. What did you learn from that mistake? What did you learn from messing that up? And take that and apply it to what you're going to do next. When you start again, as you said, I love the quote from Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa. He said, I never lose. I either learn or I win. And I love that quote. I mean, what did you learn from your failures and how can you apply them to your life moving forward?
Yeah. Yeah. And that failure isn't an identity. It is a thing that happens. I experienced failure. I didn't fail, right? I am not
Exactly.
failing.
Yeah.
And making sure to understand that that's two different things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think, you're only a loser if you don't learn from what happened to you. Losing is fine. I mean, we all lose. We lose every day, but you're not a loser unless you fail to learn the lesson that loss was trying to teach you.
So before we end here, because man, this hour went fast, I want to hear more about your book. I love books. I'm an avid reader. I've wanted to write a book since I was like 9 years old. I just love everything about fiction, nonfiction. So tell us, how did your book come to you? How did you know you were supposed to write it? And then what was that process like?
Yeah, I never wanted to write a book. I never set out to write a book. There's an old joke that says when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So God has never talked to me and said, hey, Terry, write a book. But I think what God did for me is put enough people in my path that started to make the same suggestion over and over. And hey, you should write a book. Hey, you should write a book. Hey, you should write a book. And I think I'm smart enough to sort of, buck up and say, I had to listen to this. This might be something that's important. And sustainable excellence is really born out of two conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached in high school who moved to the area in Colorado where my wife and I live with her fiance, and the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember after dinner, I said to her, I'm really excited that you're living close now and I can watch you find and live your purpose. She got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth, and there is a reason, using your unique gifts and talents and living that reason. So that was one basically story or situation. And the other one was a young man who reached out to me on social media and asked me what I thought were the most important things that he should learn, not to just be successful in his job or in business, but to be successful in life. And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help out. I didn't want to give him sort of the cliches that we all know. want to see if I could go deeper with him. So I spent some time taking some notes and kind of had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles, and I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath that principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates this principle. So literally during the months I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be.
I love it. So cool. I think, the sharing of stories is so powerful. So powerful. And what's the new book you're working on? You said you were a chapter into it.
Well, I actually 2 weeks ago, was asked to write a chapter in a book. It's called Perspectives on Cancer. That just came out, and now I'm writing another book and the working title is Four Truths and a Lie. So I've got a rough draft. I'm working on the sort of cleaning up the rough draft and things like that. It's just, I mean, if you would have told me when I was in high school that I would have written a book, I would have told you were nuts. So it's just fun for me to be able to have something positive to do.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions, Keith, before we wrap it up?
To me, you are such a perfect example of, like you had said in the beginning, choices, the choices that we have. And a lot of times I think we get kind of caught up like, no, I don't have a choice. I had to deal with this, for like Mindy, I had to deal with this car accident. I don't have a choice, but it's the choice that comes afterwards. I read a thing in Buddhism where they talked about the two darts. The first dart is what happens to us. The second dart is the one that we throw at ourselves. So I stub my toe, that happens. The pain is there. But then I start yelling at my wife for not moving a chair, blaming her for something. That's that second dart. And it seems that this entire conversation, everything has been an outward, everything is about observing outwardly instead of observing inwardly, which I think a lot of us get caught up in, especially when we're going through something, feeling anxiety, dealing with, cancer. We go into that survival mode, which draws our attention inward towards us. And you've been able to kind of keep that, I don't know if wall or protection, but pushing your perception, your observation outward. And one of the first things I learned with coaching was that when we give, if I give somebody, or if I get love, my wife comes up, gives me a hug, I feel love. But when I'm able to give love, I feel it going and I feel it returning. And to me, you exemplify that in such an amazing way, which is just so beautiful, and it shows that we do have the power to choose, and that power of our perception of how we observe the world creates you. Yeah, amazing.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And, like I said, I have bad days. I get down and stuff like that. And you're right. I find a way, when I'm in those bad places, I'm looking internally. I'm looking, at myself. Woe is me. This is terrible. I don't like this. And I find a very easy way to flip that, to sort of turn that coin over, is to go find somebody else to help. And I'm at the hospital so much, it's not hard for me to do that. I can always find somebody who's getting a treatment or who's scared because it's their first time or something like that. It's like, hey, you want to have a cup of coffee? I've been doing this for 3 years, in this particular facility. You're going to be great. Everything's going to be fine. Now, all of a sudden, the focus is not on me anymore. The focus is on somebody else and making their life better. And so I'm feeling better just because I'm making somebody else's life feel better. It's amazing how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and it's
love
my
that.
experience when I'm able to do that, love, compassion, help, that it's almost like I open up a channel and it's coming through me, right? Like I'm feeling more positivity or whatever it is, not because I have positivity in me that I'm sharing with you, but because in the act of giving, it opens up a channel to source or whatever you call that. And man, it's almost effortless then, right?
It is. Yeah, and it feels good, and now all of a sudden you're not feeling as bad as you were because you've got that source coming through you and making a difference in somebody else's life.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
Terry, was there anything that you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Um, I guess let me tell you a story. I had one of my nurses ask me, what it was like to have my foot amputated in 2018 and have my leg amputated in 2020. And as you can imagine, I told her it certainly hasn't been easy. When you're my age and you're my height, learning to walk again, falling is not an option. You get hurt from this height, so I try not to fall when I'm learning to walk again. But what I told her was, cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Mindy. That's who you are, Keith. That's who everybody who's listening to us really is. And we spend a ton of time working on this body. We go to the gym, we eat right, we reduce stress, we get enough rest. And I'm not telling you not to do that. You absolutely should do that. But what I am suggesting is maybe every day, work a little bit more on who you really are, your heart, your mind, your soul. We know this body's going to die someday. It's going to decay and it's going to go away. But I think our heart, our mind, and our soul, I think those things are eternal. I think they live on. And I just don't think we spend enough time working on them.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. So I have one final question for you.
I didn't do it. Sorry. Okay.
How about March Madness bracket? Is your bracket busted yet?
I have UConn and Purdue in the finals and Purdue winning it. So I still have the potential to be here. For the Sweet 16, I had 13 out of the 16. So I was doing pretty good.
Nice.
How about you? Is yours busted?
Not yet. I had 2 of them in my little group that we do, and one of them's busted and one of them's not. So I'm very excited about the games this weekend. And even though my husband and I don't drink very much, I love going to a bar when everybody's screaming and everybody's got their teams and the energy's up. So I'm pretty excited about it.
I am too. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This hour went so fast and it was just really lovely. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed talking to both of you.
Thank you for listening to the Chasing Thoughts podcast. Please support us by liking, subscribing, or leaving a review or comment. We would really appreciate it. If you'd like to be a guest, we would love to explore life and what it means to be human with you. Please email us at chasingthoughtspodcast@gmail.com.